All right, welcome to week 2 in sport finance, and I hope you had a good first week. And here we go with the second one. So, a wrap up of what we talked about last week. So, in your chapters, you were introduced to some basic economic principles that you're probably familiar with already. So, some things like supply and demand, and how that creates maybe a scarcity or a surplus, and how those things may affect price. So we see that with tickets a lot. Tickets is a very obvious example of that. So when the Razorbacks are having a bad season or playing a cupcake team that nobody really cares about, you see a lot of ticket deals come out. They're trying to get rid of those tickets. They're cheap. They may even give away, this season they're giving away 2 free tickets to season ticket holders for that first Portland State game. So you see those deals come out. But if the Razorbacks are having an exciting season, tickets are harder to find and they're more expensive. So, supply and demand and scarcity and surplus are easily illustrated concepts in the sports world. So we also looked at the idea of opportunity cost. And that's a pretty important concept in business. And it means the cost of foregone alternatives. So it's the option you didn't choose, the cost of not being able to choose one option because you chose another. So, we have to make decisions. Instead of taking a right, you take a left. You got to pick one. Instead of maybe the opportunity cost of buying a new car is that you don't get to go on vacation this year. So, that's kind of an example using money. So another concept we looked at this week or last week was looking at some of the different types of businesses. So some of the different types of business types and business ownership models that we see in sports. So we see in sport, we see some nonprofit and some government-owned sport organizations. So, for example, Little Rock Parks and Rec, which runs adult league sports, youth league sports, and the Little Rock Marathon. That's a government-run entity that runs those sports opportunities. And there are also some nonprofit sports organizations like Boys and Girls Clubs and Girls on the Run. If you've ever heard of that organization, Girls on the Run, those are some examples of nonprofits. And then we also talked about, or in your reading and in your chapter, we talked about some private business models that we see in sports. So sole proprietorships and partnerships are some of the more common private business models that we see in professional sports like NBA, MLB franchises. So another section of your chapter was about how government the ways in which the government can influence businesses. So a few big examples of those, we're looking at the Federal Reserve, or the Fed, and that's a government entity that sets a lot of our financial situations like countrywide. So such as the Fed sets the interest rate, which is the rate at which we can borrow money. And it also regulates the amount of the supply of money in our economy. So maybe if there's too much money in the economy and inflation is going to happen, then the Fed might take some money out of the economy. So it regulates the supply of money in the economy. So that all affects businesses, or affects all businesses, not just sport businesses, but that's a big thing that affects businesses that you do need to know whether it's a sport business or not. So, sport businesses have to deal with all that too. Another way that the government regulates business is by setting the depreciation rate of the assets that a business has. So this is particularly relevant in sports because sports has big assets. Like, think about stadiums that cost millions and billions of dollars to build. And they deteriorate quickly. Stadiums fall apart and break and aren't as nice anymore, and it happens kind of quickly. So the government sets the depreciation rate, and that kind of dictates how much the owners of the franchise can deduct from their taxes. So that's one important way that the depreciation rate affects sport franchises. So just some examples of ways that government affects sport businesses. So This week, you just turned in 2 reaction assignments. You had 2 reaction assignments due last week. The first one asked you to look at your favorite pro sports team and then do a little bit of internet research, figure out their ownership model. Refer back to your chapter to see what some of your options are, and then kind of compare and contrast what you find with your favorite pro sports team and what kind of some of the models that the chapter gives were. So kind of let me know about that of your favorite team. And then reaction assignment number 2 asked you to reflect on some of the economic principles that we read about in chapter 5. So I'll be looking at both of those this week, and what I'm looking for when I read reaction assignments are a couple of things. I'm looking for thoroughness. Reaction assignments ask you to discuss or compare or describe or explain, and that can't be done in 2 sentences. It needs to be done thoroughly and in several sentences, and I even specify a lot of times a certain length, like a page or something like that. So I'll specify that. But if it's just 1 question or 2 questions and I ask you to explain or describe or compare, that can't be done in 1 sentence. So I'm looking for thoroughness. And then I'm also looking for a connection to the chapters. So if I'm asking you to explain something based on the definitions or concepts mentioned in the chapter, then I'm looking for those. I want you to use the jargon and the words and the definitions used in the chapter. If I don't see that, then I assume that you didn't refer to the chapter when you were answering those questions. And so I'm going to take off, I'll take off points if I don't see a strong reference to the concepts or terms that I'm asking you to reference in the chapter. Reaction assignments are a way that I ask you to kind of digest the details of the chapter that we're going through. So that's kind of what I want to see. This week, we're talking about financial statements, and that's chapter 2 in your textbook. And financial statements are pictures of how a business is doing. So if a business sells stock, it's owned by the shareholders, and those shareholders have a right to know how the business is doing. So the financial statements are standardized reporting documents through which businesses report their financial status to their stakeholders. So there are 3 that we're going to look at in this week's material, and the first one is called a balance sheet. So the balance sheet is a snapshot at any moment in time of a company's assets, liabilities, and something called owner's equity. So owner's equity is an important term here. It's the element of a business that owners have bought into. So if there are shareholders, if there is stock sold and there are shareholders, owner's equity is that piece of the business that those shareholders own. And then, so the second financial statement we're going to look at is called the income statement. And the income statement shows the revenue and expenses over a given time period. So that might be year to date, or it might be the first quarter or the first 2 quarters of the fiscal year. So an income statement is that revenue expense over a certain time period, whatever time period that is, versus a kind of a single snapshot in time, which is what a balance sheet was. So that's the difference between a balance sheet and an income statement. And then the third financial statement we're going to look at is the statement of cash flows, and that tracks the cash coming in and out of the business. So basically, it's how liquid the business is at any moment in time. So this week you've got your financial exercise number 1, and it's about financial statements, the ones I just mentioned. And it's on the left menu of your Blackboard under the tab or the link labeled Assignments. So you'll see that kind of underneath your course content. If you haven't already found it, you probably have. So this week it's financial exercise number 1, and it's in your Assignments tab on the left menu. And you're going to use chapter 2 in your textbook to interpret Nike's financial statements. So Nike has to put out these kind of standardized financial statements to report to its shareholders, so the shareholders can make decisions about their investment. And I've got a worksheet for you to do based on Nike's financial statements. So you're going to pull up the instructions on the financial exercise number 1. There's a Microsoft Word document where I've typed out instructions, and I've also included a link to those financial statements from Nike. So I've included 2 different link types just in case you can't get to one of them. And we're going to look at FY 2016. So fiscal year 16, make sure that you have that set of statements. So if you're able to get the direct link, it's the FY 16 documents. But if you have to go to the broader website, which is Nike's financial statements of multiple years, make sure you use the drop-down menu and find FY 16, because there are other years in there like FY 17. Just make sure you're using 16. If you have a question, let me know and I'll help you. So this is kind of a technical assignment. You're definitely going to need Chapter 2 to help you interpret some of the technical terms that I'm asking for in the assignment. So use your textbook to identify those terms and interpret those terms. And you're also going to have to do a little bit of simple math. It's nothing other than addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. You can do it on your phone. It's not that bad. So, but just to let you know, you may need to do some calculations on these. So, that's that. If you have questions as you go through that, feel free to ask. That's what I'm here for. That's my job. So I want you to do well on it, and I don't want you to get stuck. Don't get stuck just because you're kind of trying to figure out what a certain term means, or that your textbook doesn't define it well, or something like that. So just ask, and that's what I'm here for. So have a great week, and I look forward to reading your reaction assignments 1 and 2. That's going to be another part of my job this week is grading those and getting those back to you with my feedback. So have a great week. Good luck on this chapter, and hope we get some less hot summer weather coming, and hopefully the fall's coming soon. Okay, have a good week. Talk to you soon.